My name is John Ryalls, and this is going to be a talk about A/B testing. First of all, who am I? I'm John Ryalls. I'm a web developer for Investopedia. I've been a professional web developer for about 6 years, and I've done A/B testing for about 2 of those. So I guess the big question right now is, what is A/B testing? This talk is going to be sort of a high-level exploration of the concept, why you would use it, how it kind of works, and we'll go over just sort of the basics. There's a bit of statistics, but I'm going to fudge it a bit, mostly because it would take forever to explain, and this is an introductory statistics course, so we'll just do it. So why? Here's a scenario: you work at Big Bob's Banana Bonanza, and business wants a big banner to sell more bananas. So design goes in, designs them a banner. Sales sees that and they say, oh, we need more bananas because we sell bananas. And then management says, no, I think we want some monkeys because people like monkeys. So they'll go in and give it to you to go implement. The thing is, nobody really stops and thinks about what people want. The individual person has its own tendency to do things, click on stuff, is attracted to certain colors, and on average, user behavior on a whole is just this strange and random thing. So how can business be certain which big banana banner boasts the best banana buys? And most of the time, they just guess. Oh, I lost my mind. But I don't think guessing is appropriate for web design. So Thomas Huxley said, the man of science has learned to believe in justification not by faith but by verification. That's why we get into science. A/B testing is pitting various variations of your site against each other in a no-holds-barred, bare-knuckle deathmatch for supremacy, ending with one glorious victor rising on the wings of a gilded Pegasus to the upper echelons of live production code. So how do we do that? First, you got to create a set of variants. These variants are going to be small changes or large changes depending on the design of your test. We'll get into that. And they'll be set up in such a way that you can take your audience and split them to show each group of audience a different variation of your test. You need to set up a concrete set of goals and metrics that you can track. And then once you've run enough people through your tests, compare user engagement and run some statistics to find which version of your site was actually better. So a word on variations. They can be really, really simple things. They can be changing the color of a button. They can be adding calls to actions all over the place. There's neat little psychological things like people have a tendency to click on the middle element of a group of 3. So if you want to try that, you can try shifting things around. I've seen things like removing fields from forms so that they're easier to get through. That keeps people engaged and stops them from clicking away from it and stuff. You can also do entire landing page redesign. So you would have an A/B test that directs different users to completely different pages and then track via analytics or whatever built-in mechanism you're using for your A/B testing and see your overall conversions from that page on. But how we do this? We'll get into, well, not really actually. We don't get into how very much. You can inject JavaScript directly into the page via some third-party APIs, and they'll usually do all the work on the front end. So I'll use Optimizely as an example because it's one I know. You include Optimizely code on your page, and then Optimizely will bucket your users into different variations and then track where they're going. And then when they notice that the user has reached a certain page, they will inject front-end JavaScript that you put in there to change different elements, move things around, stuff like that. For bigger changes, we tend to use server-side stuff. So you would go in and the variation would be set on, well, we'd use query parameters to redirect people to completely different pages, but the entire experience on their end is seamless, stuff like that. Audience partitioning. So you need to take your traffic and randomly distribute it amongst each of your variations. One tricky thing about this is you need to track which variation you're sending your users to, because there's 2 reasons. One is long-term user behavior. So if a user is going on your website and lands on an experiment, and an experiment shows, you know, a big banana banner. And then at some point during their visit, they decide to buy some bananas. You want to be able to attribute that conversion to that test. So you need to be able to track them throughout their journey through your website. The other thing is if a user comes to your website twice, you want to make sure to give them the same variation, because it is jarring and scary for websites to change between page views, and that scares the user away. Don't want to do that. Goals and metrics. So goals and metrics depend entirely on what it is you're trying to test. This is an important thing. Some people will just try to test everything all at once and just like watch every single metric at the same time, and it doesn't work that way. So you're trying to make a banner that sells more bananas, and you have to think about the banner itself. Clicks on that, clicks on different conversion funnels throughout your website from that page, and then like end game conversions all the way to the end of like your shopping cart, stuff like that. But if you're trying to make an experiment to increase newsletter signups on a forum, then you want to look at people clicking on your form, people typing into your form, people that start typing into your form but don't actually finish typing into your form, and look at those numbers and see how they change based on what your experiment's doing. So like I said, it's usually click tracking events. People interact with websites by clicking most of the time. That's generally how they work. But you can also look at Google Analytics type stuff, like your conversions, your time on site, and your bounce rate, and your page visits, and all that. That gets into sort of tying into things. Then you get your experiment running, you let it run, and people go on the site and they see, oh, there's a shiny new banner. I'm going to click on it. It happens. And then like a couple days later, like the excitement of a new thing starts to wane, but they continue using your site, and some people are clicking on the banner and some people aren't, and different variations are doing different things. And then you continue to let it run because it's the weekend and people stop using your website on the weekends because they just do that. And it's just how it goes. But overall of this, you can start to see a trend in the significance of your test if you're looking at the data, and you can start to see which one is performing better overall. You might be very tempted to stop it at that point and say, okay, so we got way more people here after like a day clicking on things. Maybe this is the best one. But you have to continue letting that run for a certain amount of time. And there's a reason for that. The reason is statistics. Random sampling isn't always random. There's a chance that given any random set of users, that set of users just happens to convert more than any other. You can't rely on early results, but to do the point of A/B testing, and this sort of ties into why this works, is you need to deduce the mean effect of your conversion. So you want to trying to think of the wording, like the increased rate of your conversions, you want the mean of that to go up and account for the variance over time. Let's try to explain that. So a mean, everybody knows what a mean is, I hope. It's just an average over a period of time. In this case, you're looking at conversions over a period of visits. You have some probability of success. The thing is that there's going to be some variance in that mean. So every day there's a different probability of that number being higher or lower than the actual mean. It's a phenomenon in statistics. So the only way to sort of tie that in together is by just having more and more samples, right? This goes into your standard deviation. So standard deviation is the measurement of how spread out your results are. You can calculate it by taking your different numbers along the way and calculating sort of the average difference between that and the mean. Sort of, it's a bunch of statistics, but the goal of A/B testing is to figure out which of your variance is statistically significantly better than the goal. How much better depends on the mean. So when I say the mean, I mean the mean improvement over a default like control. And then you also need to account for that standard deviation around it. I have an image here. this will make everything make a little bit more sense. So these little black lines will be your mean result in convergence. So for example, in this one, there is about a mean of 20% improved results from this variant, and there's about a 10% standard deviation. This variance is greater than 0. So there is a statistically significant result here. Like there's a 90 whatever you set it to % chance that the mean of this test is going to be greater than 0. And this one, it sort of falls in the opposite side of the spectrum, where it's statistically significantly negative. But then here, this is where the weighting comes in, is when you don't have, when your bar here isn't necessarily all over or under 0, you don't have a sure thing on whether or not it's better or not, because it can actually fall somewhere in between there. Ugh. So it follows that when this bar is smaller, it takes more visits to sort of iron out where that is. And when it's closer to 0, it also takes sort of more visits to iron out where that is. So small conversion rates take more traffic to reach certainty, and small changes in conversion rate take even more traffic to reach certainty. So how do we figure this all out? How do we tell how many people we need to run through a test before we can actually say it's good to go? There's some online tools that sort of do this math for you. So here's an example of if you have a baseline conversion rate, and this is really big, of 10% of your visitors are converting, and you want a minimum detectable effect. So you say you want a 20% increase, or you're seeing a 20% increase in conversions. You need about 6,000 users to hit each variation. If you half that detectable effect, it's just a 10%, so a smaller effect, the number goes up to 24,000. And then if your baseline conversion rate was already really small and you're trying to make a bigger effect, this is 10% of the baseline, so 0.82, 0.22. That sample size goes up to 130,000 visitors per variation. So A/B testing is not practical for very, very tiny changes unless you have a crazy huge audience on your website. That's a takeaway there. Here's the tool that I used to calculate this. If you want to go in and play with that. So the results of all these tests, after you run it, you get a goal number of conversions, the mean conversion rate. So this is how much better each thing you have is. You have a confidence interval of your results, and then a calculated statistical chance that any one given variation is better than the rest. Here's a grainy example of a results sheet from Optimizely, which is a third-party A/B testing platform. So you can see here we've got the conversion rate of each of these two variations and the original. You can see that these two were both better than the original. This one was not statistically significantly better than the original because there was still enough variance in here that it overlapped with none at all. But this one, having just that extra little bit of confidence, was declared the winner. And as you can see, you can also compare between different variations using these results. So you can have multiple tests that check multiple different things and decide which one is the one that is better for your website. Also down here is really interesting. This sort of demonstrates the sort of over time, when you introduce a change, things start getting kind of tumultuous, but then they even out after a while. It's really neat. So how do you, if you wanted to do this, do it yourself? Like I said, there's third-party tools. We use Optimizely, which is just super enterprise. I think the cheapest package is something like $2,000 a month, but it's a ridiculously powerful tool that lets you go in and make these variations and run tests against geo-targeted audiences with all sorts of crazy conditions. And you can do it all in just an editor. So business people can do it. It's ridiculous. You can also inject JavaScript and stuff. I've heard of VWO, which is a significantly cheaper option that is also crazy full featured. They have audience limits. So you pay $50 a month and you get 30,000 visitors that get partitioned into experiments. And Google Optimize is free, but it's awkward. We tried using it, but the reason it's awkward is it only lets you track events that are set up in Google Analytics. So if you have a very strong analytics setup, then it's not a problem because you've already got everything set up. But for us, it would mean setting up click tracking events for everything we wanted in analytics and then reading it through Google Optimize, which would have taken some work. But yeah, again, the pros and cons. The third-party tools are usually very good. They do all of the statistical math for you. They've got fancy what you see is what you get editors that just inject things onto pages. And they have additional tools. They're also very expensive, and we've run into with things like Optimizely, which are massive. They reduce page speed by a second on time to first paint, which is significant when you're trying to run a website. Yeah. Your other options are to make your own. So I've run into a couple smaller libraries and bigger libraries that kind of do some of the same things. We've got Alphabet. I don't know how to pronounce that. This is sort of a JavaScript framework that will go in and let you divvy out traffic to experiments, track users, and display different experiments by injecting JavaScript into your page. Which is cool. It doesn't do the math part of things, so you'll have to go into analytics and do that yourself if you're up for that challenge. And then we've got Wasabi and Sixpack, which is actually open source but Intuit. These sort of do the same thing that your big third-party tools like Optimizely do, but you have to host the server and APIs on your own machines to do that. Yeah, where are we? So yeah. A/B testing is actually crazy powerful if you get it running and understand it. There's also lots of caveats and stuff and the intricacies of it that I've run into, but I don't have time to talk about those right now. But if you get it working and you use it and you use it well, you can actually make scientific inferences about how people are using your website and not just guess about what will make things better, which I think is great. And that's it. If you have any questions, that would be a good time.
Yeah, a question. A/B testing is very interesting, and like you said, you're never done A/B testing, right?
No.
So you have to continuously improving, and you never know how good your performance could be. The number that is displayed is based on how good your knowledge is on how to do conversion.
Yeah.
Or the way you think conversion should be, right? This is the number that reflects it. Do you guys have a guideline for how to start A/B testing? Because I think there's a lot of different paradigms for A/B testing. And
there are. I think, in terms of a guideline, we as a company, I wouldn't say don't really do it. I would say just try it and see what happens. It's really just it's entirely science in that you have to just come up with things and try it. And if it works, then it works. And if it fails, then you try again. But I would say do some research on, I guess, Google Optimizely being the cheapest third-party tool that you can use out of the box would probably be a good start. If not, then one of those other libraries might be good too. I would not recommend jumping straight into a $2,000 contract unless you're willing to really use it. But if you're in a big enterprise industry, absolutely, it's worth the money, because even just when you've got 1 million users hitting your page, just that 0.5% increase conversion rate actually means something,
Yeah, just following on Michelle's question there. So the science of A/B testing is kind of like the science of UI UX as well, because they're both user experience. And has somebody I'm sure people do this and take notes of what works, what doesn't work. Is there a resource or a place where the work's already kind of done for us, because not reinventing the wheel?
That would be
nice. A lot of apps are like, it's pretty standard. Sorry, yeah. So go ahead.
It's mostly we've compiled our own results privately, but I've never found anybody that's just like here. I think actually, yeah, the best I could think of is just takeaways from general UX UI talks. They'll get into the neat little things like the sciences of colors and what colors attract people to click on things. Stuff like putting limited time offer notices on things will get them to click on it more because the sense of fear gives you this incentive to act. At the end of the day, these are all just ways to test those before doing it to make sure it's really working. But I've never seen any specific, like, here's a bunch of things you should try because it's been shown to work. Although I've seen some interesting things, like putting search bars on the left increases search engagement, didn't turn down engagement on other things. But yeah, you find all sorts of neat little things when you do it.
If I understand correctly, you agree beforehand on the sample size that you need, or you
should. You should definitely figure out a minimum at least soon into your test because what a lot of people will see is you'll get results really fast, but until you hit that sample size as calculated, there's still a chance of things changing drastically throughout the course of your experiment. You really can't tell until the numbers are certain. And a lot of people make that mistake of just over checking and before it's even close to done, just being like, okay, this is the right one, let's done. Let's go, move next test.
So would you ever abandon an experiment if it turned out that one condition was just horrible? And I mean, because these are also real potential paying customers. So how do you kind of factor that
That's
decision into it?
I think it would depend on how horrible, because if it's a matter of just awful user experience and we're seeing just like financially negative implications of doing this thing, then maybe it's point of turning it off. But that is a hard judgment call that I don't know how I would deal with actually.
So just following up on that sample size calculator is a nice little tool, but one thing it was missing was an estimate of your baseline variance. Like,
so
how much does your conversion rate go up from day to day, week to week normally?
So that's what that was. Let me see. Pull this up. Not featured were a couple other controls on here. So we got the baseline conversion rate. So what was I missing?
So it doesn't have a factoring of your underlying variance.
So this your underlying variance. I see what you mean. Yeah, so this would be the sort of the effect that changes because of your experiment. You're right.
The idea is
the
that
variable from the baseline.
You're not expecting to be able to conclusively say anything about a change that's smaller than 10% of your 2%.
Yeah.
But that's
but if there's already like a huge
if you've already got some sort of seasonal variation, I don't know, you're doing something related to sports and things go up when there's a hockey game on.
So yeah, it gets really complicated when there's they recommend if you're in an industry where there's like significant seasonal variance to actually run your tests through like all periods of variance, right? So if it's something like like a hockey thing where like half of the year is significantly different from the other half of the year, you almost want to run it throughout the entire year. But that starts to get very cumbersome in terms of actually making decisions, right?
So my question though was about how do you deal with repeat customers when you're already changing little things on them, and how do you measure that sort of impact of just constantly testing and constantly changing things on repeat visitors?
Well, so for the most part, when you get repeat visitors, you want to keep track of them. We do it with cookies. So we'll tie cookies to their browser account, and then they'll always be bucketed into the same variations. So they'll only see one version of each of the tests we do the first time it changes. They won't see things constantly changing. And what they do, we change things all the time, but it's only ever once, and it's only ever once per experiment, and they only ever get put into one variation. So for the most part, it's not like jarring. They'll come back one day and something will be new, but it won't be that it comes and goes all the time. Unless we decide not to use it, and then it goes. But.
Well, I guess then the question is, what is the time scale of the experiments that you're doing, and what is the actual scope? Like,
yeah,
how much big are these changes you're talking about?
So we've done changes that spread across. Oh, let's see. We've done header changes that basically every page of the site, but most of our changes tend to be either single types of content. So we'll have changes on like term pages. So every term page will have, or a select group of term pages will have this change applied to them. We'll have landing pages where a single landing page, one page gets the change. And then we'll have, stuff like that. And then those will go for anywhere between a month and 3. Like they're usually fairly long run, especially depending on how much traffic each individual page gets. It really depends on how much traffic you're throwing at this experiment, because you can get a lot of experiments done if you're willing to throw everybody at them. But for bigger, more jarring changes, we choose to use just like smaller percentages of our audience for a longer period of time, just to prevent that sort of like crazy jarring change for everybody. Yeah.
I do have a question. I was listening to podcasts on this. Like, how many tests you guys run at a time? You have lots of page views, so I'm really curious how many you actually put in at a time.
I think at peak we had maybe just shy of 15 going. We definitely try not to overlap any, and that's a common pitfall of A/B testing as well, is if you're trying to do multiple tests on multiple different things on the same page, you stop being able to determine which test is responsible for your conversion, and your numbers start to get kind of muddled. So we generally avoid that if we can. But yeah, about 10 to 15, but usually maybe 5 are going, usually in very different parts of the website. Yeah. Thank you.
Exchange.js is Edmonton's JavaScript meetup. Thanks to our sponsors, Jobber and Investopedia. Support the meetup and like and share this video, and stay informed by following us on Twitter and meetup.com. Links in the description. See you soon!